October 18, 1976. Vienna, Austria. Karl Miller slid into the booth at Café Central, his overcoat still damp from the autumn drizzle. The ornate ceiling and marble columns of the historic coffeehouse stood in stark contrast to the tension in his shoulders. After 15 years with the CIA, he should have been immune to pre-meeting anxiety, but something about this operation felt different. The waiter delivered his melange coffee without being asked. Karl had been frequenting this spot for months, establishing his cover as an American business consultant. He unfolded his copy of the International Herald Tribune, scanning headlines about President Ford and Jimmy Carter's upcoming election, but his attention was on the entrance. Karl believed in America's mission. The son of Czech immigrants who fled communism in 1948, he'd grown up hearing stories about the oppression his family had escaped. When he joined the agency in 1961, it seemed like the natural extension of his father's fight. Now, as deputy chief of station in Vienna, he coordinated intelligence collection across the Eastern Bloc. At precisely 10:17, the door opened. The man who entered wore the uniform of a Czechoslovakian airline pilot, his posture military straight despite his obvious exhaustion. Captain Josef Kuznetsov was exactly as described in the initial communication. Mid-40s, silver at the temples, the barely perceptible limp from an old training accident. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Karl returned to his newspaper as Kuznetsov ordered at the counter, then made his way to a nearby table. The pilot placed his flight cap on the adjacent chair, left hand positioned exactly as agreed upon, thumb extended, a signal confirming he wasn't under duress. The coffee house bustled with morning patrons. Tourists mingled with locals, the clatter of cups and quiet conversations creating perfect cover for what was about to happen. Karl's heart pounded against his ribs as he folded his newspaper, leaving it on the table as he stood. Brushing past Kuznetsov's table, he executed the brush pass they'd rehearsed only through coded messages. His hand momentarily touching the pilot's shoulder as he slipped a matchbook containing a time and location into the man's pocket. Outside, Karl walked 3 blocks, employing anti-surveillance techniques he'd perfected over the years, crossing streets mid-block, pausing to examine shop windows, doubling back unexpectedly. Nothing. If KGB surveillance was present, they were exceptionally good. The preliminary meeting had gone according to plan. Now came the waiting. The safe house sat on a quiet street in Vienna's 19th district. Karl arrived an hour early to sweep for surveillance and prepare. He methodically checked the one-time pad and cipher materials, tested the recording equipment, and readied the camera. Through the window, he watched as the street lamps flickered to life against the darkening sky. At 8:15 p.m., there was a knock, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. Karl verified the visitor through the peephole, then opened the door. "You were not followed?" Karl asked in Czech as Kuznetsov entered. "No. I took the precautions exactly as instructed." The pilot's voice was steady but strained. Karl gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. Would you like tea? Something stronger perhaps? Whiskey if you have it." Karl poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a tumbler and slid it across the table. "Captain Kuznetsov, I need to understand exactly what you're offering and why. The message you passed through our source in Prague mentioned technical specifications of the MiG-25. Kuznetsov swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Not just specifications. I can deliver the actual aircraft." Karl stiffened. The MiG-25 Foxbat was the Soviet Union's most advanced interceptor, a mysterious high-altitude fighter that had been causing sleepless nights at the Pentagon. Western intelligence had only glimpses of its capabilities, mostly from grainy reconnaissance photos. "That's significant," Karl said, his mind racing through protocols for high-value defections. "But why? Why risk everything?" Kuznetsov drained his glass. "My wife, Daria, has multiple sclerosis. In Czechoslovakia, the treatments available are..." He shook his head. "The medications she needs exist in the West. I've exhausted every official channel." "There's more," Karl prodded, recognizing the hesitation in the pilot's expression. "Yes." Kuznetsov's voice hardened. 3 months ago, my brother was arrested for possessing banned literature. Just books, Solzhenitsyn, Havel. He's now in Ruzin prison. I once believed in the system, in defending my country. Now I see there is nothing left worth defending. Karl nodded. The motivation seemed genuine. Personal grievances rather than ideological conversion often drove the most reliable defectors. What you're proposing would require extensive planning. The aircraft is presumably under heavy guard at all times. I've been selected to fly a diplomatic mission to Algeria next month, Kuznetsov explained. It's my opportunity, perhaps my only one. I'll need guarantees for my wife and daughter. If you deliver what you're promising, the United States government can arrange immediate citizenship, medical care for your wife, new identities, and financial security. Karl leaned forward. But I need to know exactly what intelligence you can provide beyond the aircraft itself. For the next 2 hours, Kuznetsov outlined what he knew, the Foxbat's true operational ceiling, its electronic countermeasures, the limitations of its engines. Karl recorded everything, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions. What began as a routine intelligence meeting had transformed into something that could potentially shift the balance of the Cold War. November 5, 1976. CIA Headquarters, Langley, Virginia. Are you absolutely certain about this assessment, Miller? Director George Bush leaned back in his chair, studying Karl with piercing intensity. Yes, sir. Our technical experts have reviewed Captain Kuznetsov's information. Everything checks out against the limited intelligence we already had on the MiG-25. He knows details that could only come from someone with direct access. Deputy Director of Operations William Colby tapped his pencil against a classified folder. And you're convinced of his sincerity? I am. His motivations are personal, not ideological, which typically indicates reliability. He's not seeking glory or wealth, just medical treatment for his wife and safety for his family. Bush exchanged glances with Colby. The president has been briefed. He's authorized Operation Foxhunt, but with extreme caution. If the Soviets detect our involvement, the diplomatic blowback would be severe. There's also the matter of the aircraft itself, Colby added. The technical intelligence would be invaluable. Our aviation experts would finally understand the capabilities we've been estimating for years. Karl nodded. Kuznetsov's diplomatic flight to Algeria departs on November 30th. The plan is for him to divert to Sicily, where we'll have a reception team waiting. And the extraction of his family? Bush asked. Already in motion, sir. We have an NOC in Prague coordinating with assets at the West German Embassy. If all goes according to plan, his wife and daughter will be in West Berlin before he lands in Sicily. The Soviets will know immediately that we have their aircraft, Colby warned. They'll assume we're extracting every secret. That's partially the point, Karl responded. The psychological impact of losing their most advanced fighter to defection could force them to accelerate or abandon certain aerospace programs. Either way, it disrupts their planning cycles. Director Bush stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Proceed, Miller. But understand, if this goes wrong, the administration will deny all knowledge. With the transition to Carter's presidency underway, we're in a particularly vulnerable position. Karl understood the unspoken message. Success would be celebrated quietly. Failure would be his alone to bear. November 20th, 1976. Prague, Czechoslovakia. Daria Kuznetsova clutched her daughter's hand as they approached the West German Embassy. The embassy car had picked them up from their apartment 20 minutes earlier, exactly as planned in the coded message Josef had sent through his airline colleague. Remember, Katia? She whispered to her 11-year-old daughter. We're visiting Aunt Eliska in Munich. That's all you know if anyone asks. The girl nodded solemnly. Daria's heart ached at how quickly her daughter had adapted to a life of secrets and coded language. The embassy guard checked their diplomatic invitation, forged by CIA specialists, and waved them through. Inside, a woman introduced herself as a cultural attaché and led them to a private office. Mrs. Kuznetsova, the woman said, switching to English once the door was closed. I'm Diane Kennedy from the American consulate. We don't have much time. Daria felt her knees weaken. This was real. They were actually escaping. Your husband's operation is proceeding as planned, Diane continued. Tonight, we'll move you to the embassy residence. Tomorrow morning, you'll leave in a diplomatic vehicle for the border. You'll be traveling as the family of an American educator. These are your new documents. Diane slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside were American passports, driver's licenses, and birth certificates, all with the surname Matthews. Memorize these details immediately. Your flight to West Berlin leaves tomorrow afternoon. Your husband will join you within 2 weeks. Daria studied the documents, her trembling fingers tracing over her new identity. After years of watching Josef grow increasingly disillusioned, after countless nights of pain that Czech doctors couldn't treat, freedom seemed almost unimaginable. What if he doesn't make it? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. Diane's expression remained professional, but her eyes softened. Then you and your daughter will still be taken care of, exactly as promised. But Captain Kuznetsov has planned this meticulously. The operation has extraordinary support at the highest levels. Katia tugged at her mother's sleeve. Will I go to school in America, Mama? Daria pulled her daughter close. Yes, darling. A new school. A new beginning. As Diane outlined the remaining details of their extraction, Daria stared at the embassy window, beyond which Prague Castle loomed in the distance, the symbol of a government and system they were about to escape forever. November 30th, 1976. Algiers International Airport. Algeria. Josef Kuznetsov completed his pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, his movements betraying nothing of the thundering heartbeat in his chest. The MiG-25 Foxbat, the pride of Soviet aerospace engineering, hummed with latent power on the tarmac. Weather report shows clear conditions for the return flight. Captain, his co-pilot, Lieutenant Vasily Gregorovic, remarked as he settled into his seat. Josef nodded. Good. Should be a smooth journey. The diplomatic mission had gone exactly as expected, delivering high-ranking Czechoslovakian trade officials to negotiations with the Algerian government. Now, with their human cargo delivered, they were scheduled to return to Prague with an empty cabin. Lieutenant Gregorovic would be the complication. The young officer was not just a co-pilot but KGB, assigned to monitor Josef after a distant cousin had defected to France the previous year. The KGB hadn't found any evidence linking Josef to the cousin's escape, but they had placed him under subtle surveillance nonetheless. As they taxied toward the runway, Josef mentally reviewed the plan. Once airborne, they would initially follow their filed flight plan north across the Mediterranean. At precisely 11:37, he would offer Gregorovic coffee laced with a sedative provided by his CIA contact, tasteless, odorless, and fast-acting. From there, he would change course for Sicily, where an American team would be waiting. Tower clearing us for takeoff, Gregorovic announced. Josef advanced the throttle, feeling the massive aircraft surge forward. The MiG-25 roared down the runway, and within moments, they were airborne, climbing rapidly through the North African sky. At 30,000 feet, Josef leveled off and engaged the autopilot. The vast Mediterranean stretched below them, glittering in the morning sun. He checked his watch. 11:24. 13 minutes until the point of no return. I'm going to prepare coffee, Josef announced casually. Would you like some? Please, Gregorovic replied, his attention focused on adjusting the radio frequencies. Josef moved to the small galley area behind the cockpit. With practiced calm, he prepared 2 cups, adding the CIA-provided powder to one. His fingers didn't tremble. Years of piloting supersonic aircraft had given him exceptional steadiness even under extreme pressure. Here you are, he said, returning to the cockpit and handing Gregorovic the doctored cup. Careful, it's hot. The lieutenant nodded his thanks and sipped the coffee. Josef pretended to drink from his own cup while monitoring the flight instruments. 8 minutes passed in routine cockpit conversation. Josef noticed Gregorovic blinking heavily, fighting to keep his eyes open. Are you all right, Lieutenant? Josef asked, feigning concern. I'm feeling strange, Gregorovic mumbled, his words slurring. Very tired suddenly. Perhaps the long diplomatic functions, Josef suggested. Rest for a moment. I have control. Within 30 seconds, Gregorovich's head lolled forward as unconsciousness took him. Josef quickly secured the young officer with the seatbelt, then changed the aircraft's heading. Instead of continuing northeast toward Czechoslovakia, he banked west toward Sicily. Josef switched off the transponder that identified the aircraft to civilian air traffic control and activated the secure radio frequency he'd memorized. Foxhunt Actual, this is Pilgrim, he transmitted, using the code names established in Vienna. Package is secure. Diverting to delivery point. ETA 47 minutes. The response came immediately. Pilgrim, this is Foxhunt Actual. We confirm your transmission. Receiving team is in position. Continue as planned. As the Mediterranean coastline of Sicily appeared on the horizon, Josef felt a complex wave of emotions. Guilt for betraying his oath as a military officer, relief that his family was already safe, and anxiety about the unknown future awaiting him. But overshadowing everything was certainty. For the first time in years, he was acting according to his conscience rather than orders. December 1st, 1976. Naval Air Station Sigonella, Sicily. Karl paced the hangar floor, checking his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. The MiG-25 was now 30 minutes overdue. Around him, the reception team, American and NATO intelligence officers, aviation engineers, and security personnel, maintained professional composure, but the tension was palpable. Any update from radar? Karl asked the Air Force liaison officer. Nothing yet, sir. Italian air defense has been instructed to track but not intercept any unidentified aircraft approaching from the south. Karl nodded, trying to suppress the creeping dread. Had Kuznetsov been discovered? Had he changed his mind? Or worse, had he been a double agent all along, feeding disinformation to lead them into a diplomatic trap? The secure phone in the command center rang. Karl rushed to answer it. Miller, he barked into the receiver. Sir, radar station reports an unidentified aircraft approaching from the southeast. Speed and altitude consistent with a MiG-25. ETA 8 minutes. Karl exhaled slowly. Notify the recovery team, and get the sedative antagonist ready for the co-pilot. Within minutes, the distinctive roar of jet engines filled the air. Through the open hangar doors, Karl watched as the sleek, silver shape of the Soviet interceptor appeared in the distance, its delta wings catching the midday sun as it descended toward the runway. The landing was textbook, smooth and controlled. As the aircraft taxied toward the hangar, security teams moved into position, surrounding the MiG at a safe distance. When the engines finally shut down, a profound silence fell over the hangar. Karl approached as the canopy opened and Josef Kuznetsov emerged, removing his helmet with shaking hands. Their eyes met, and a wordless understanding passed between them, the enormity of what had just occurred. Captain Kuznetsov, Karl called up. Welcome to the West. Josef climbed down and stood on NATO soil. My family, safe in West Berlin, just as promised. Your wife and daughter arrived yesterday without incident. You'll be reunited within 48 hours, after initial debriefing. Relief washed over the pilot's face. And him. He gestured toward the unconscious co-pilot still strapped in his seat. We'll administer the counteragent. He'll wake with no memory of the last few hours. Then we'll place him in diplomatic custody, evidence of your hijacking, before returning him to Soviet authorities. As medical personnel attended to Gregorovich, aviation engineers approached the aircraft with reverent caution, like archaeologists discovering a priceless artifact. In many ways, that's exactly what it was, the technological crown jewel of Soviet military aviation, delivered intact. They will call me traitor, Josef said quietly as they walked toward the debriefing room. Others will call you hero, Karl replied. History rarely speaks with one voice. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and severe. The Soviet Union denounced the criminal hijacking of their aircraft, demanding its immediate return along with the kidnapped pilot. Czechoslovakia recalled their ambassador from Washington. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. But beneath the public outrage, intelligence agencies on both sides recognized the seismic shift. The technical secrets of the MiG-25 revealed something unexpected. The aircraft was not the technological marvel Western intelligence had feared. Its impressive speed and altitude capabilities masked significant limitations: vacuum tube electronics instead of solid-state systems, limited range, and primitive avionics. For Karl, the operation's success brought a bittersweet promotion. As the CIA's new station chief in West Berlin, he oversaw Kuznetsov's extensive debriefing and personally delivered the news when the pilot's brother was released from prison in a quiet East-West prisoner exchange. May 15, 1982. Langley, Virginia. The impact was far greater than we initially realized. Karl explained to the new CIA director William Casey. The Foxbat defection forced the Soviets to completely reassess their technological security protocols. More importantly, it revealed the true state of their aerospace capabilities. Casey nodded, reviewing the classified assessment. And the broader implications? It fundamentally altered our strategic calculations. We discovered they were dedicating nearly 25% of their GDP to military spending, an unsustainable level. This convinced President Reagan that increasing American defense spending would force the Soviets into an arms race they couldn't win. And Kuznetsov? Living quietly in Arizona with his family. His wife's condition has stabilized with proper treatment. Their daughter graduates from college next month. Engineering, ironically. Does he ever express regrets? Casey asked. Karl thought about his last meeting with Joseph 3 years earlier. No. He said something I've never forgotten. He told me, "I didn't betray my country. My country betrayed itself when it chose machines over people." As Karl left the director's office, he reflected on how a single act of defiance had cascaded through history. Kuznetsov's MiG-25 had revealed crucial weaknesses in Soviet military technology, emboldening Western leaders to pursue more aggressive strategies that would eventually contribute to the Soviet Union's collapse. One pilot, one decision. The course of the Cold War altered not by armies or nuclear arsenals, but by a man who simply wanted his wife to receive proper medical care and his daughter to grow up free. June 12, 1987. West Berlin. Karl stood among the crowd gathered at the Brandenburg Gate, listening as President Reagan delivered his historic challenge. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." In the diplomatic section, he noticed a familiar figure, Josef Kuznetsov, older now, standing with his wife Daria and their daughter Katya. They had been invited as special guests of the State Department, though their presence and significance remained classified. After the speech, Karl approached them. "It's good to see you, Joseph." The former pilot smiled, lines creasing around his eyes. "And you, my friend. My wife insisted we come when the invitation arrived. She said we should witness history being made." Daria, leaning slightly on a cane but looking healthier than when Karl had first seen her photos years ago, clasped his hand warmly. "We owe you everything." Karl shook his head. "You owe me nothing. Your husband made the brave choice." As they gazed at the wall that divided east from west, Joseph spoke quietly. "When I flew that MiG to Sicily, I never imagined this moment would come. I thought perhaps my family would be free, but not my homeland." "It's not over yet," Karl cautioned. "The wall still stands." "But not for much longer," Joseph replied with certainty. "Systems built on lies eventually collapse under their own weight. I simply helped expose one of those lies." As they parted ways, Karl watched the family walk toward their hotel, 3 lives transformed by a single act of defiance. In the intelligence world, victory was rarely clear-cut, success seldom acknowledged publicly. But sometimes, very rarely, one could see the direct line between a covert operation and history's turning points. The wall would fall 2 years later. The Soviet Union would dissolve in 4. And somewhere in the American Southwest, a former Czech pilot who had delivered the Cold War's most valuable intelligence prize would watch it all unfold on television, knowing he had played his part in bringing freedom to the lands he had once defended.